My name's Andy McKinnon. Well, I've lived in this area. I live about 7 or 8 miles west of here. And I've lived there with my family, my wife and a couple of daughters since 1990. They're out of the house now, but my wife and I are still here. And I've always been struck by the beauty of this valley as you look to the southeast with Tussey Mountain in the background. It's really quite uncommon for this area to have this kind of open space this close to State College. But I've always hoped that this area would not be developed. I crossed my fingers all the time that this would remain natural, probably naively so. And one day you may wonder why I got involved in this. I don't remember exactly how I got involved in the fight to save this land and to save our water. But I do remember one day coming by and seeing a proposed for development sign up. And of course I was really distressed by that. When I heard that they wanted to rezone it, yes, and were instrumental in moving the regional growth boundary to the south to allow for the development. You can't, my understanding anyway is they needed to move the growth boundary. They weren't allowed to build outside of the growth boundary. So they were influential in getting the growth boundary moved down south of where they want to put these two developments in. So I got involved with some people. Kelly Hoover comes to mind for sure, David Stone, who were as concerned about the development as I was. And I started to go to Ferguson Township supervisor meetings and eventually voted for some people for the Board of Supervisors who were a lot more concerned about safe drinking water and safeguarding open space. So we managed to get 3 more progressive people elected to the board. Laura Nittany, who's still on the board, and we're really glad she's there. Peter Buckland and Colleen Unroe, who pretty quickly bowed out because of some technicalities, but we ended up with those 2 people on the board, and so they have definitely helped to swing the board a little closer, more aligned with the public's interests. The Board of Supervisors, the function of them is to sort of run the business of the township. That's my take on it. I am also a reluctant player. I've been very involved. I've been active, but it's not that I necessarily want to be out here. I would prefer this area to be safeguarded in perpetuity and not have to worry about it, not have to worry about big business trying to ruin the landscape and possibly ruining the water. It's not my highest, my number one thing to do. I'd rather be hiking out here on Tussey Mountain or riding my bike or playing my guitar or something like that. But I just feel an obligation to get involved. And I think a lot of people have the same sentiment. Even the people that seem most involved, it's not that they're natural activists and they really want to be out here. I think there may be a couple of those, but my guess is in large part most of them feel an obligation to do what's right for the community, to do what's right for Mother Nature, and get involved in whatever way they can. The fighting of it, a lot of things. It's involved filing a lawsuit against Ferguson Township and the Toll Brothers, who is the developer for Penn State that wants to put the luxury student housing complex in. So raising money in order to actually sue those entities, which happened, and we won. I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit, but we did win the first round of that lawsuit. So we had to raise money for that. We've been attending tons of Ferguson Township Board of Supervisor meetings, Planning Commission meetings, Council of Government, COG meetings as well. We have been attending meetings at the State College Borough Water Authority. We've been writing letters to the editor. We've been talking to our neighbors, just trying to raise awareness about this issue. We've been doing our own private and sometimes collaborative research on the history of this area, Catherine Watt is yet another stakeholder in this who is on our side of things. She's a tremendous documenter and journalist that writes her own blog, which is called Bailiwick News. She's done tremendous work in researching what's led to this, to where we are now, and she continues to write very involved articles about what's going on. Right now, we've been engaging on a township level, trying to decide whether that there's a 200-acre parcel south of here that doesn't quite reach 45. It's separated from 45 by some some land that local farmers own. But we're trying to get some protections placed on that 200 acres so Penn State or whoever they might sell it to at some point doesn't plan to do the same thing with it as they've planned to do here. We're trying to safeguard it from development. But being out here in tents, staying on the site, waving signs, trying to get people involved, it's a holding pattern. We feel that we are staving off something that a short while ago seemed inevitable. We're hoping our efforts bear fruit and we're able to stop this project. So I think that's reality. We have been instrumental in keeping it at bay. It's very possible that Toll Brothers, in fact, I think it's likely Toll Brothers probably would have broken ground by now if we wouldn't have opposed this development, if we wouldn't have sued them and Ferguson Township. If you ask Penn State what the current status of this is, they might very well say nothing's changed, that they're not listening, they're not swayed by what we're doing. That could be true. I hope not. I hope they're paying attention, and I hope they're seeing that they are being seen as anomalies or outliers as far as public opinion, as far as community members, what people want to do with their own community. This is not the first time Penn State has acted in an oppositional manner to the rest of the community. It's actually an ongoing pattern. This is only the latest. The one before this was the tragic Piazza, the fraternity incident where the student Piazza, whatever his name was, died in the fraternity house. Penn State was culpable in various ways for that happening. Penn State has institutional inadequacies that they have to deal with. But they might feel that nothing's changed and it's business as usual and it's just a matter of time before their developer, Toll Brothers, breaks ground. Penn State seems to have a pattern of trying to absolve themselves from responsibility from issues that have arisen out of that are completely related to Penn State, that wouldn't have happened without Penn State as an institution being part of the equation. That's the common denominator between the Piazza incident, tragedy, I should say, the Toll Brothers issue, the Sandusky events, and the pipeline issue, which is a fourth one that really needs to be talked about. I wasn't involved as an activist on the pipeline issue. This happened a few years ago where activists succeeded in engaging with Penn State. They wanted to put a high-pressure pipeline through, I think, the Highlands area of State College, maybe down Foster or Fairmount Avenue. I don't know. I don't live in town. I live in Ferguson Township. But some of the people that are involved on this Toll Brothers issue were involved then, and they succeeded in getting Penn State to move that pipeline up closer to campus and preventing some kind of explosion in a residential neighborhood. Or those four issues: Sandusky, the pipeline, the Piazza tragedy, and now Toll Brothers, all to me have in common where Penn State wants to do something a lot of times to make money or maintain a good public image without really necessarily taking any responsibility. It's almost as though they want their cake and they want to eat it too. With the Toll Brothers, I'm more familiar with that issue than the other three. And I'll tell you what I mean by that, how they have this pattern of not taking responsibility. So Penn State decides to build this luxury student housing complex out here instead of on campus, where they would be responsible for the costs associated with that housing. This is a pattern. There are many student housing complexes that Penn State has chosen to site off campus in neighboring municipalities, such as the Circleville Farms sprawling development that was put in a couple of years ago. So the municipalities are left to pick up the tab of whatever infrastructure is required. It's just a burden on the community that lives around here. A pretty significant influx of students. Penn State doesn't have to worry about it. They've increased their housing on campus apparently about 1% in the last 30 years, whereas they've increased their enrollment. I don't even know the number, but their enrollment is steadily rises every year. But a lot of those students are going to be driving their cars into campus. It's going to clog up the arteries of town, of campus. It's not going to be a good thing, especially in this time of climate change when we should be doing everything. Incidentally, it's in Penn State's strategic plan, I believe, to think about climate change and what they need to do to lower carbon emissions. If it's not, it should be. Actually, my worst fear is that the development will go in, and so we will then, in a matter of possibly less than a year, possibly only in a few years, we will have a sprawling luxury student housing complex on approximately 40 acres of land, which is right here. It's sprawling, I say, because it takes up a lot of land. 40-some acres is a lot of territory. It's a lot of land. They personally want to build it. They have given lip service to the idea of building in an environmental and maybe in an aesthetic way, so that it doesn't look so bad. It's not going to be this high rise. Instead, it's going to be spread out in this cottage style, which is supposed to be advantageous aesthetically. It's still hugely spoiling of the landscape, putting anything here compared to what's already here. So that could go in. If this does go in, it facilitates the park going in, the sports complex going in, because the sports complex has an agreement with Toll Brothers to build the access road and associated infrastructure such as sewer, electricity, and water, probably along that road, which would be an extension of Blue Course Drive to the south through this field. I don't know how many feet, several hundred feet to the south. The park is just as threatening to the water and to the aesthetics of the landscape as the Toll Brothers development itself is. Unfortunately, that's not as well. It's not as well known of an issue as the Toll Brothers one at this point, but it's very threatening. It would be a horrible thing if it went in. So it needs to be given equal attention to the Toll Brothers development. My worst fear is this development, the Toll Brothers luxury student housing complex, could go in, followed by the Whitehall Road Regional Park, and those two things would be the first two dominoes that could start a cascading process where the whole area that Penn State bought, I don't know if that equals 550 acres, or I don't know how that plays out, but probably would involve at least the 200 acres at issue south of here. So it could be a total of at least like 350 acres could be developed. Could no longer be green space, open space, farmland. And the more development you have, all of it, by the way, is in the recharge zone, is in the watershed for the two well fields that supply 2/3 of the drinking water for State College. So the more development you have up here, the more it sits atop fractures. They are abundant. There are all kinds of fractures that have been mapped in this watershed. There's one right down here that's a prominent one that this swale corresponds to, where Toll Brothers wants to put their stormwater basin. It's a stupid place to put something that could leak, get into the subsurface, follow that fracture, which is a zone of higher permeability. Water can flow through that. It's heading already down gradient towards those well fields. Yeah, the one I think of, and I do have a hydrogeological background, would be if that stormwater basin leaked, and they want to put it, it's no mystery to me why they want to put it down in the swale, because that's the direction that runoff wants to flow. That's the course of least resistance. So they're going to try to put their stormwater basin in an area where gravity is helping them out. They're not going to site it up here where they have to pump the water up to it, something like that. They're going to put it down in a low point, like in that swale. The problem with that is, if that stormwater basin, as they intend to design it, if it would leak, and it is very possible it could leak. And I know nothing about stormwater designs. I don't know if they would use a synthetic liner, or if they would use a clay, some kind of clay barrier to keep it from leaking. But if it was breached, if there was a leak from the stormwater basin, then it's a very short distance, vertical distance, for contaminants that are in the runoff, and they could be lots of different contaminants. They could be gasoline, they could be diesel fuel, it could be motor oil, anything running off of the parking lots that are here with the development. There's a lot of, students could have different things, different kinds of products it could be medicines. It could be who knows what it is. It could be a chemical soup. They call it stormwater. It's actually it's a mixture of all kinds of potential contaminants. But those could possibly leak through what's a pretty shallow, pretty thin soil regime. It's in some places only a few feet of soil till you get down into the bedrock. The bedrock is pretty high. It's only a few feet below the surface. It's fractured dolomite is what it is. It's the Nittany Formation. It's about 400 million years old. It's very ancient. It's there. It's carbonate rock. It's called a karst terrain because it has sinkholes and it has these fractures in it. The contaminants can get down through the soil into this fracture it's been mapped. We know it's there. It's below the swale. So they would make their way through the fracture, pretty quickly get below the water table. Because the water table is, I'm not sure if it's 50 feet below the surface right here, but it's not that deep. So the contaminants could percolate down, hit the water table, get into the water, be carried down gradient, still in that fracture, toward the well fields. That's the scenario that I think of where this development could contaminate our water. The best way of filtering such things, any kind of contamination, is to leave the soil as it is. It does a great job of filtering, and it's not that that there's not going to be a problem, that it's guaranteed to remain safe, but if you want to increase the chances of contamination, start reworking the landscape. Start doing some soil removal and some compaction and some other processes that are necessary to, for instance, put in the stormwater basin. And yes, I think it is possible that you could increase the chances that some of that native background contamination, if you want to call it that, pesticides or nitrates, things associated with farming, you could facilitate those, increase the chances of those getting into the same fracture or other fractures on this site. In my ideal scenario, Penn State would realize that the community has a very unified voice that is saying, we want this land protected. We want our water protected. We want our open space. We want this beautiful scenery protected. And they would take note of that. They would take it seriously, and they'd say, okay, we're concerned that maybe the Toll Brothers would sue us if we tried to break this contract. So be it. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe it would be better to listen to the community in which we are embedded and put an end to this, to this ill-conceived proposal. Get out of the contract so that this land can remain pristine, so it can remain undeveloped as it was intended to. The reason why they put the regional growth boundary at Whitehall Road was, I've read on paper that the reason for that was to safeguard the water supply. But I would be very surprised if a reason for putting the growth boundary at Whitehall Road wasn't to safeguard open space and farmland as well. I would love to see it remain just as it is right now as we're speaking. We have talked with Penn State about the possibility of more green development in here, other than a luxury student housing complex or a sports complex, such as a living lab. It would be an extension of research, of ag research, because Penn State is a land-grant university. So it would be right up their alley to do that. Use it for research, use it as a place where students could come out here and they could learn how to farm sustainably. Similar to some of the things they do out at Ag Progress Days, farther to our southwest. Or, this area could actually be a moneymaker. You could actually put a solar farm in here. It's a south-facing slope. People have done calculations and shown that you could make hundreds of thousands of dollars from solar power generation. That might be an option as well. But if you're asking me personally what I'd like to see happen, I'd say let's get back to the original vision for this area and leave it pristine. I just want to clarify, that's not necessarily the view of the Nittany Valley Water Coalition. That's me speaking personally. People have their own views, and I don't know that we really necessarily have an official stance, an official vision on what we would like to have done with the land. We have certainly talked about the living lab sort of scenario. But if there's anything that could come out of it, it's possibly developing a more active, a more unified community that can rally around the protection of their natural world. After all, that's why people want to come. That's one main reason why people want to move to the center region. It's beautiful because you have panoramas like this. I mean, you don't find this everywhere. This is gorgeous. People don't come here solely because they might have a job, because there's a lot of businesses here. They also come here because it's a really nice place to live. It looks nice, it feels good, there's fresh air, there's good water to drink. So the community, I think, really needs to step up as a whole and really start. There is one other thing I wanted to bring up that's related to this. Step up as a whole and start to live the Community Bill of Rights that Ferguson Township residents adopted in 2012. We adopted a Community Bill of Rights which includes rights for nature. It's not enforceable. But the more that we evoke it, the more that we practice it as best we can, refer to it, talk with others about it, the more we are gaining power and gaining control over our own local lives. And so I think that this issue could act in a way that process of community building takes place and really starts to gain some speed.